Hello, and welcome to ESSA School Level Reporting Financial Transparency from the DPI School Financial Services team. This video is Part 1. What is School Level Reporting? In late 2015, the Federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, was signed into law to replace No Child Left Behind. One of the new requirements tied to Title I funding was that state reporting shall include the per-pupil expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, including actual personnel expenditures and actual non-personnel expenditures of federal, state, and local funds, disaggregated by source of funds, for each local educational agency and each school in the state for the preceding fiscal year. So what does that mean? ESSA creates two new reporting responsibilities. For the district or local educational agency, LEA, the responsibility is to report per pupil federal and non-federal personnel and non-personnel costs to DPI. In turn, we at DPI have the responsibility to collect this information from the LEAs and report it to the U.S. Department of Education. At this point, you may be asking, what is the purpose of this new requirement for school-level reporting? The basic goal here is to promote transparency in how districts, LEAs, and states are allocating their financial resources in schools. The legislators and advocates who put this requirement into the law specifically wanted to have data for answering questions like, what resources are made available for students within your district, for students across district in each state, or even across states? The theory of action, or idea, behind what school-level reporting is meant to accomplish is that data on school spending will get administrators, school boards, state officials, and the public to focus on policies and other changes that will promote greater fairness and equity for all students. DPI's plan to implement school-level reporting has been in development for a few years now. For the 2018-19 school year, there will be a new school-level budget report due in December 2018. This will be in addition to the existing PI 1504 budget report already required for Wisconsin school districts. It will also be a new requirement for independent charter schools. Next, a school-level annual report with each district's and LEA's actual spending in the 2018-19 school year will be due in September 2019. As with the budget, this will be a supplemental report. Finally, DPI will publish the school-level expenditure data reported by districts and LEAs in June of 2020. For the 2019-20 school year, we will use exactly the same process with the same reporting tools. However, from 2021 onward, we will no longer use the supplemental school-level reporting application. Instead, we will extract the data directly from the next-generation financial reporting system currently in development. More information on that system will be forthcoming in the spring of 2019. Working with other states and experts in the field of school finance, we have developed a reporting system that breaks expenditures into three basic types. The first expenditure type is federal. These are staff, purchase services, and other expenditures that are funded with federal program dollars, such as a Title I or IDEA flow-through grant. The federal expenditure type includes federal funds that are awarded to a district or LEA through a consortium or fiscal agent, such as a ESSA or another district. As a note, for districts who receive federal impact aid, we will not be considering that federal funding tied to expenditures. Those payments are essentially a payment in lieu of property taxes and will be treated as state and local for school-level reporting. The next expenditure type is state-local. These are staff, purchase services, and other expenditures that are funded with local dollars and state aids. Sources such as property taxes, state equalization aid, student fees, gifts and donations, or bank interest. Most of the time, this will be a district's or LEA's largest type of expenditures. Now, you might be thinking that federal and state-local cover everything. However, early on in our discussion with other states and experts in the field, an issue came up. When you read the ESSA law, the requirement for school-level reporting is to report actual per-pupil personnel and non-personnel costs. But what about costs that aren't directly associated with educating your students year after year? For example, when a school district passes a building referendum, it borrows millions of dollars, spends them in a short period of time, and then makes debt payments over the following years. Would it make sense to temporarily double or triple a district's per pupil spending numbers because of a building project? Another example. In Wisconsin and many other states, districts are able to provide community programs separate from and in addition to their education for local children, which we call Fund 80 programs because of the accounting requirements. Do these have anything to do with the purpose of school-level reporting? The solution to these questions was to create a third type of expenditure called exclusions. Exclusions are just these types of expenditures, things like building projects, debt, or community programs, that DPI and the 38 other states that have been discussing school-level reporting agree do not make sense to include for this requirement. We'll discuss exclusions in more detail in the next video. If your district has not started preparing for school-level reporting, there are a number of things you should be doing to get ready. The first is to identify which sorts of costs in your district or LEA are at the school level versus those at the district level. Start with the easy cases. A second-grade teacher at your elementary school has a salary and benefits that they are paid, along with supplies, curriculum materials, and other things for their class. It would make sense to assign all those costs to the elementary school. On the other hand, your superintendent, district administrator, CEO, whatever you call them in your LEA, they work on behalf of the district or LEA as a whole. Their salary, benefits, travel, and supplies would make more sense as district-level costs. Once you have the easy cases identified, move on to your gray areas. One that has come up for many districts and LEAs is special education, which in their accounting systems have often been considered their own program, separate from any particular school. In these cases, you just have to work through what makes the most sense for your district or LEA. Perhaps you have cross-categorical special education teachers who have their own classrooms in schools and could be assigned to those schools, whereas your speech and language therapist travels around based on student need and should be considered at the district level. If you decide to allocate or split a particular cost between schools, rather than across the entire district or LEA, make sure you have a good reason and a clear, straightforward method for doing so. Splitting costs can be one way to make school-level reporting more complicated than it needs to be. In fact, not overthinking things is a good overall strategy for identifying your costs as school or district. Even with the gray areas, most of the time a little common sense will get you to the best solution. One thing to keep in mind is that for school-level reporting, any cost you report at the district or LEA-wide level will be spread out as the same per pupil amount for every school. If you are thinking about allocating a cost between all of your schools based on enrollment, just call it a district cost. It's much easier, and in the end, the math is the same. Second, if your district or LEA is not using location codes in your accounting system, start doing so. The DPI Specified Accounting System for Wisconsin Schools, WUFR, makes available a 3-digit code used to identify a cost by its location. We do not specify particular codes for particular schools. What to use is a local decision. Districts and LEAs report their list of schools to DPI through the school directory application. We use this as the starting point to define and create the school report cards for the statewide accountability system, as well as assigning schools for WISE-. Use those schools in the school directory as a starting point for assigning location codes. And if the school directory is wrong or inaccurate, change your schools there. Some districts have been using location codes to track particular projects or programs. Move away from doing that. There are other account dimensions in WUFR used for that purpose. Finally, map your location codes to the 4-digit school codes assigned in the DPI school directory. The financial software vendors are working on tools to help with school-level reporting, and you will need to do this to make their tools work. Similarly, use project codes, another accounting dimension available in WUFR. DPI specifies project codes for all the federal and state funding programs we administer, and using them is required for districts and LEAs to properly manage their federal grants under the Uniform Grant Guidance. Not only that, good use of project codes makes tracking expenditures and generating reports in your accounting system a lot easier. With the school-level budget report, our expectation is that the total of all federal expenditures will match the federal revenues on your PI 1504 budget report. That is, Source 700 revenue in your 10 and 20 funds, less federal impact aid and Medicaid, which we are not considering federal funding for school-level reporting. Beginning in 2020-21, project codes will define federal expenditures in our next-generation fiscal reporting system. DPI will use those project codes to compile federal expenditures for ESSA school-level reporting to the U.S. Department of Education rather than the application we will start using this year. Next, build reports in your own system. Start with the exclusions first. Those come off the top, and it makes sense to take those out before getting onto the remainder of your costs. Use location and project codes when you are generating reports. The idea is that if you set up your books correctly, putting together these reports will not be overly difficult. At the district or LEA-wide level, these are expenditures that are neither exclusions nor associated with a particular school. Be careful with the distinction between district LEA level costs, school level costs, and exclusions. Make sure that as you set up your reports, you are not inadvertently duplicating costs, which will affect your bottom line. Talk with your finance software vendor. School-level reporting tools are currently under development by all the major financial software vendors in Wisconsin. Find out from them what do you need to do on the front end to get ready for school-level reporting. Don't just rely on the raw output that those tools generate for you. Use your reports and your experience as reasonability checks for those numbers. They should not seem overly odd to you when you enter them into the report. Finally, start to discuss school-level reporting within your district, LEA, and community. With your administrative team and your board members, do they know that the ESSA school-level reporting requirement is coming? How will school-level reporting affect your budget process and the decisions you make in allocating resources? For parents and staff, do you plan to provide this information to them? If so, how will you engage them and put it in the proper context? Your local media will often take information from DPI or other state agencies and use those to generate content. What context can you provide for those numbers to make sense in your community? So, our main takeaways for school-level reporting Part 1 are: this is a new reporting requirement for districts and LEAs and for DPI, who will be reporting expenditures by school split into federal, state, local, and exclusion types. And now is the time for districts and LEAs to start getting ready for school-level reporting. Coming up in Part 2, we will be discussing what format we are using for school-level reporting and describing the exclusions, what they are, and what should districts and LEAs be using. For more information, you can visit the DPI website for school-level reporting or email the school finance team. Thank you.